स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। हरि ओम तत्सत्। हरि ओम तत्सत्। हरि ओम तत्सत्। Revered General Secretary Maharaj, Swami Shuddhidananda ji, revered Swami Balabhadrananda ji Maharaj, revered Swami Nirvikarananda ji Maharaj, all of the seniors assembled here, my devoted pranams to all of you, and my affectionate regards to all the brahmacharis, my juniors, and my regards and namaskars to all the devotees assembled here. Today is Sri Ramakrishna's birth tithi. It's a very special day, and we all have assembled here to deliberate upon his life and his teachings. What is the significance of Sri Ramakrishna's life? If we ask this question, as an answer, Swami Vivekananda states a beautiful idea. Swamiji says, in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, we have an extraordinary searchlight in whose illumination we can clearly understand the entire gamut of Hindu religion. It's a very important observation coming from the Yogacharya Swami Vivekananda. He says that in Sri Ramakrishna's life, we have an extraordinary searchlight in whose illumination we can understand the whole gamut of Hindu dharma. And when we talk about Hindu dharma, it is the Vaidika dharma. Vedas mean the infinite treasure of spiritual knowledge. It covers the whole ground of spiritual knowledge and experience. Now, if we have to understand this great dharma, it's extremely difficult. So we need a very powerful searchlight in whose light we shall be able to clearly understand what this Vaidika Hindu Sanatana Dharma is. And Sri Ramakrishna is that searchlight. Now the next point is, how did Sri Ramakrishna become such an extraordinary searchlight in whose illumination we can understand the whole gamut of Hindu dharma? How did he become this? Again, we find a beautiful statement coming from Swami Vivekananda. Swamiji says, in Sri Ramakrishna, what do we find? In Sri Ramakrishna, he lived in one single lifetime of 50 years, the national spiritual life of 5,000 years. In one single lifetime, we find Sri Ramakrishna had lived the national spiritual life of several ages. That is how, in one lifetime, Sri Ramakrishna had covered the whole ground of so-called this infinite spiritual knowledge, laws and principles, and he had almost become the condensed form of Vaidika Sanatana Dharma. That's why just by reading scriptures we won't be able to understand the depths and the extent of this dharma. For that we need a searchlight, and Sri Ramakrishna is that brilliant searchlight, because in one lifetime he had lived the national spiritual life of 5,000 years, Swami Vivekananda says. Now again one question comes to our mind. How was it possible for Sri Ramakrishna to lead the national spiritual life of 5,000 years in one lifetime? How was it possible? This is also a natural question which would come into our minds. In one single lifetime of 50 years, this spiritual personality had lived the national spiritual life of several ages. How could he do that? As an answer to this, what comes to my mind is that Sri Ramakrishna was a merciless and ruthless invader, if I am permitted to use this term. In a war situation, we all know what happens. There is a territory which is being invaded by the enemies, and the enemies invade the territory from one side, then from the other side, then from all sides, and the enemies, they invade that land. And once they invade that land, then we know what happens. It is plundered, it is pillaged, it is ravaged. Similarly, in Sri Ramakrishna's life, we find Sri Ramakrishna was a merciless and ruthless invader. He went on invading the spiritual realm one after the other. To put it in Sri Aurobindo's wonderful term, Sri Aurobindo says that what do we find in Sri Ramakrishna's life? In Sri Ramakrishna's life, we find a colossal spiritual capacity, a colossal spiritual power in and through which Sri Ramakrishna straight away goes to the center of spiritual realization, and as it were, he takes the kingdom of heaven by violence. It's really a beautiful observation about the phenomenon called Sri Ramakrishna. He takes the spiritual realm by violence. It's just an invasion. He invades the spiritual realm from various sides. He adopts one path. Within a few days, he goes straight away to the center of spiritual realization. Then he takes the other path. Then third and fourth, one after the other, he goes on invading the spiritual realm and he plunders the spiritual topography for the welfare of the entire human race. And this is the reason why I say that Sri Ramakrishna, in one lifetime, he could live the national spiritual life of 5,000 years. And that is how he has become an extraordinary searchlight in whose illumination we can clearly understand the whole gamut of Hindu, Vaidika, Sanatana Dharma. Now, we are today discussing this unfathomable phenomenon called Sri Ramakrishna. Literally unfathomable. He cannot be fathomed. Why? Our puny minds. It's not possible. Even Swami Vivekananda didn't dare to speak about him. We all know this very well. So when we have to think about this unique phenomenon called Sri Ramakrishna, and today I would just attempt to place before all of you only two simple points. When we look at Sri Ramakrishna's image, Sri Ramakrishna's form, what do we perceive? A simple question. When we look at Sri Ramakrishna's image, we stand in front of this image here in the Garbhagriha. We look at Sri Ramakrishna's form. What do we perceive? Two things. Intense God intoxication on the one side. On the other side, intense dispassion for the things of the world. These are the two qualities, two gunas. As if these two gunas have actually condensed to become this form called Sri Ramakrishna in flesh and blood. Sri Ramakrishna means intense love for God, and intensest dispassion for the things of the world. Intense anuraga for Bhagavan and intensest vairagya for the things of the world. This is all that sums up this amazing phenomenon called Sri Ramakrishna. He knew nothing else. Now, to just expound on these 2 points of Sri Ramakrishna's God intoxication. First thing, the biographers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they have written that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was such that by the mere utterance of the term Hari, he would be lost in God intoxication. Hari Bol, and he is lost in God intoxication. The famous Bengali mystic poet Ramprasad says that I don't drink wine. I drink the nectar of Kali's love. When I say glory to Mother Kali, Jai Ma Kali, when I say Jai Ma Kali, my mind becomes God intoxicated. And drunkards say that I have drunk wine. Now, about these statements, it's very interesting. Swami Shuddhidananda ji, in his magnum opus, Sri Ramakrishna Lila Prasanga, Shuddhidananda ji says, we would not have believed in these statements if we had not seen Sri Ramakrishna. It's a very beautiful observation. We read such things that just by the utterance of God's name, we find Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he loses himself in complete absorption in God consciousness. He is lost to the external world. Ram Prasad says the same thing. Sharad Maharaj says that we would not have believed in these things if we had not seen Sri Ramakrishna. This was the usual state of mind of Sri Ramakrishna. He used to always remain in a God intoxicated state. Some of the examples. We all know that during his sadhana time, he would be worshipping Mother Kali in Dakshineshwar Kali temple, and there he would become so much absorbed in his worship that sense of separation and differentiation between the worshipper and the worshipped is lost, and he is immersed in that undiluted and undivided ocean of spiritual consciousness and bliss. And in that state, he begins to worship himself instead of worshipping Divine Mother Ma Kali in front of him. The offering which is kept there to be offered to Ma Kali, just then perhaps a cat comes close by and Sri Ramakrishna offers that to that cat. The differentiation between the worshipper and the worshipped has vanished. Everything is one supreme, infinite ocean of consciousness and bliss. What the Upanishads don't tire themselves reiterating. There is only one non-dual consciousness. That is the only ultimate reality. And Sri Ramakrishna, we find, completely immersed in this one non-dual consciousness. Another instance. One day, Sri Ramakrishna tells Holy Mother, Sri Sharda Devi, in the Dakshineshwar, that very room, that I am going to the temple to offer my pranams to Mother Kali. So please, in the meantime, you make some betel rolls and please prepare the bed and you clean the room. With these instructions to Holy Mother, Sri Ramakrishna goes to the Kali temple. We can all well imagine the whole topography. We all know there is some distance between the main temple and the room in which Sri Ramakrishna used to live. Sri Ramakrishna is going to Kali temple. And after some time, Sri Ramakrishna is coming back to his room. He is not coming back. He is somehow managing to reach his room. With great difficulty, just like a drunkard, he is unable to walk straight. Somehow he manages himself to reach that corner room where he stays. And after entering the room, he finds Sri Sharda Devi deeply engrossed in doing something. from behind, Sri Ramakrishna goes and gently gives her a push. And the scene is so beautiful. And Sri Ramakrishna gives a gentle push to Ma Sharda Devi, and Ma Sharda Devi turns her head and looks at Sri Ramakrishna. And the moment she looks at Sri Ramakrishna, she is totally stunned. What did she see there? She is seeing Sri Ramakrishna with his eyes red. He is unable to stand straight. His words are indistinct, just like a confirmed drunkard. The sight was totally shocking, in a way shocking to Sri Sharda Devi. And in that state, Sri Ramakrishna is asking Holy Mother Sharda Devi, "Dear, have I drunk wine?" And Sri Sharda Devi is saying, No, you have not drunk wine. Why would you drink wine? Then Sri Ramakrishna is again asking, in that case, why am I not able to stand straight? Why is my speech indistinct? Why am I behaving in this manner? Then Sri Sharda Devi says that you have not drunk wine, you have drunk the nectar of Kali's love. Tumi Kalir bhavamrita khecho. In Bengali, Sri Ma says, Tumi to Kalir bhavamrita khecho. You have drunk the nectar of Kali's love. Is it possible for us to understand what is this? In our day-to-day life, if we have to become intoxicated, we all know we have to take recourse to wine or hemp or ganja or whatever it is. But without any of these external things, is it possible for a human being in this human system to get extreme intoxication just by having the darshan of a deity or just by uttering the name of Bhagavan? This we see in Sri Ramakrishna's life. Extreme intoxication in the divine. One more instance. Ramchandra Datta, we all know, his house was in Simulia in Calcutta, and his house was in a very narrow lane. To reach his house, one had to leave the carriage on the main road, and some distance one had to walk towards the Ramchandra Datta's house. So Sri Ramakrishna used to often visit Ramchandra Datta's house, and there used to be satsang there, and whenever Ramakrishna went there, it would be a mart of joy and bliss. We all know that. So in one such occasion, the whole evening was spent in this satsang, singing the glories of God's name. Kirtan is going on, and there is just waves of bliss rising, and everyone is simply inebriated in that God's Anandam. After the satsang, Sri Ramakrishna is somehow coming out of Ramchandra Datta's house. Just try to visualize the scene. And with great difficulty, he's stepping out of the house. And as I said, that lane is a narrow lane. He had to walk some distance to reach the main road. And this person, Sri Ramakrishna, he is swagging from left to right, just like a drunkard. The description is so beautiful in Leela Prasanga. You will find he is being held by two persons on two sides. He has lost his sense of direction. Somehow, with great difficulty, with his eyes half closed, Sri Ramakrishna is somehow managing to reach the carriage. Now, some bystanders there who were standing there, who were looking at this whole scene, they were passing comment. They were worldly people. They didn't understand what is this going on. So that bystander is commenting. You look at this person, how inordinately this person has become drunk. He has drunk so much wine that he cannot walk straight. So Sharad Maharaj very sarcastically he writes there, indeed, what intoxication. What intoxication and what a drunkard. So this is what we find in Sri Ramakrishna's life. Such intoxication, God intoxication, such inebriation just by taking God's name. Now coming to the second point. Intensest dispassion for the things of the world. The Upanishad says, Na karmana, na prajaya dhanena, tyagena ikena amrutatva manushu. Amrutatvam, or this God consciousness, is attained Not by karma, nor by progeny, nor by wealth, only by tyaga and tyaga alone. Renunciation preceded by dispassion. Without this, it is impossible for anyone to have God realization. Tyaga is the very cornerstone of spiritual life. And Sri Ramakrishna was the very living embodiment of the spirit of dispassion and tyaga. Some instances. His tyaga of Kanchana. Kanchana means money. We all know this. Sri Ramakrishna, during his sadhana period, we all know he had practiced Mati Taka, Taka Mati. It's a well-known incident. All of you know about it. In one hand, he takes a little bit of dust, and in the other hand, he takes few coins, and he says that this coin is dust and dust is coin, and he throws away both the things into the Ganga. The crux of this practice is that this coin or wealth is as worthless as dust when it comes to the pursuit of spiritual realization. It has got absolutely no place in spiritual life. We are reminded about the great Upanishadic teachings. When Maitreyi went to Yajnavalkya, Yajnavalkya is giving wealth to Maitreyi. So Maitreyi is asking Yajnavalkya, my dear, please tell me whether this wealth is going to help me to attain immortality. And Yajnavalkya says, do not even have the distant hope of attaining immortality in and through wealth. Amritatvasya na ashasti vittena. Absolutely no hope of attaining immortality in and through wealth. Wealth has got no connection with this God consciousness. Where is the demonstration? In the modern times, it is Sri Ramakrishna who demonstrated it in his life. Now, such was his distaste and dispassion for money that even in deep sleep, if his body came in touch with a coin or a metal, it would react vehemently. His body would contract, his limbs would retract, and he would experience a shocking, piercing pain. Unbelievable. An idea. What was the idea? Mati is Taka and Taka is Mati. This Taka is Mati. This money is worthless. It has got no place as far as God realization is concerned. And this idea doesn't remain an idea in his mind. It gets into his head. It becomes one with his nervous system. It becomes his very natural reflex action that even in deep sleep he is unable to touch any metal or coin. I want to slightly distract at this moment because here I am reminded of a wonderful thing. See, Swami Vivekananda, the great Yugacharya, he has formulated wonderful definitions of different spiritual terms. The question is, from where did he get these wonderful definitions? These definitions in today actually has become classics in spiritual literature, literally classics. But the question is, from where did he get this definition? All the definitions he got from seeing Sri Ramakrishna. I am giving one example. What was the definition of education given by Swami Vivekananda? Swami Vivekananda says, education is nervous association of ideas. When a certain idea gets associated with the nervous system and it becomes an inseparable part of the human personality, then that is education. From where did Swami Vivekananda get this classic definition of education? He had seen it in Sri Ramakrishna's life, how this idea of worthlessness of money has got into his system to such an extent that his very reflex action begin to speak about that idea of absolute worthlessness of money. Another instance. Mathur Babu gives him a shawl. We all know that it's a famous incident. A shawl is given, a shawl worth 1,000 rupees in those days. And it is put on Sri Ramakrishna's body. And Sri Ramakrishna, for a few moments, he keeps it. And then he asks a question. What is this shawl made up of? This shawl is made up of the hair of some animal. And it is a very expensive shawl. After putting on this shawl, my ego will rise. It will make me arrogant. It will make me think that as if I am superior to others, and it is going to take me away from God. That was enough. A thing which takes me away from God, instantly he takes that shawl, throws it on the ground, stamps it, literally rubs it on the ground, and he was almost going to set fire to it. That is the description there. And somebody comes and stops him. So this is the kind of distaste and dispassion that we find in Sri Ramakrishna's life for the things of the world on the one side. Lakshmi Narayan Marwadi comes and gives 10,000 rupees to Sri Ramakrishna, and Sri Ramakrishna says that I felt as if somebody is severing my head with a saw. Such an extreme pain he felt. Mathur Babu comes and offers to gift a land worth several lakhs of rupees in those days. And Sri Ramakrishna becomes so agitated and annoyed that he was going to beat Mathur Babu with a stick and saying, "You rascal, you want to make me a worldly person?" So this is the kind of dispassion we find in Sri Ramakrishna's life. Shankaracharya says in one of his beautiful compositions, this man of Brahman, for him what is wealth? Kantham iva shreem api kutsayanta. It's a beautiful idea. Kantham iva shreem api kutsayanta. The Shri, the very goddess of prosperity, is despised as if it is a piece of tattered rag or tattered cloth. So where is the demonstration of this idea which we find in the scriptures? That demonstration we find in Sri Ramakrishna's life. So if this is the case with his distaste for Kanchana, what about his distaste for Kama? It's another aspect of it. A very beautiful chapter of Sri Ramakrishna's life. For him, every female figure was nothing but the manifestation of the Divine Mother of the universe. He had no other idea about the female figure. His wife, Sri Sharda Devi, is just lying on the bed close to him. He is asking his own mind, "Oh mind, don't be a hypocrite. Here is the female body for which the whole world is mad. Don't be a hypocrite. Ask yourself whether you want to enjoy it." And then, as he is about to stretch his hand, what do we find? Instantly, his whole sensory system, his body, his mind, everything is withdrawn, and he goes into samadhi. And whole night he is immersed in samadhi. He could not come down from that superconscious state. Mathur Babu and Rani Rasmani, seeing Thakur's very strange behaviors. Thakur used to behave, we all know, he behaved like a mad person sometimes. So Mathur Babu and Rani Rasmani used to think that this is owing to Thakur's unbroken brahmacharya. So we have to do something for this. Saying so, they engaged a prostitute. Her name was Lakshmi Bai. This you can find in Bila Prasanga. And Lakshmi Bai, both at Dakshineshwar as well as in Mechua Bazaar in Calcutta, she tried to seduce Sri Ramakrishna and to awaken some carnal desires in him. But she miserably failed. Sri Ramakrishna was like a 5-year-old boy of immaculate purity. On the contrary, what happened? This prostitute, she felt the awakening of purest maternal feeling inside her heart just by the association of Sri Ramakrishna. This was Sri Ramakrishna's, what should I say, intensest dispassion for the things of the world. Even Pandit Vaishnavacharan, he also attempted in this way to test Sri Ramakrishna in this respect. So in this way, dear devotees, what do we find in Sri Ramakrishna? Let me just sum up the whole thing before I wind up my talk. When we look at Sri Ramakrishna's image, as I said in the beginning, what I find is he is the combination of these two great qualities, these two great gunas. He is the condensed form and embodiment and expression of these two gunas, as well as if these two gunas have taken this form in the form of Sri Ramakrishna. And what are these two gunas? Intensest God intoxication on the one side, and intensest dispassion for the things of the world on the other side. The realm in which Sri Ramakrishna lived, in that realm there is no darkness. And in the realm in which we are all living, it is full of darkness. When I talk about darkness, it means Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsarya. That realm in which Sri Ramakrishna lived, there is no trace of Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsarya, and we are living in a realm where there is no light. So our only prayer today on this holy occasion to Sri Ramakrishna is that may Sri Ramakrishna take our minds, take all of us from darkness to light, from mortality to immortality, and from falsity to the eternal truth. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.